Now, there's a thin line between faith and performance, between discipline and control, between raising kids and policing them. And the most dangerous thing about crossing that line is that you don't often realize when you've crossed it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Long Take, The Long Take. My name is Dawson, and today we're talking Toyin Abraham's Oversabi Aunty. But before I go further, I have to say thank you to those who saw the first episode. That's the Funke Akindele's behind the scenes. I hope you've seen the movie. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out, okay? Now let's get into this one. Toyin Abraham's Oversabi Aunty. Now there's a thin line between faith and performance, between discipline and control, between raising kids and policing them. And the most dangerous thing about crossing that line is that you don't often realize when you've crossed it. You know, you still believe you're doing the right thing. You still believe that you are the moral compass in the room. You still believe everyone else is the problem. Now, Toyin Abraham's Oversabi Aunty walks boldly into that uncomfortable territory. You know, it's a space that feels familiar, loud, funny, and quietly unsettling. You know, it's a film that makes you laugh first. You would laugh, okay? And you would sit back and ask yourself questions later. It was released in the cinemas on the 19th of December, and it also marks Toyin Abraham's directorial debut. And for a first-time director, I think it's a very intentional choice of a story. And it's exaggerated, I'm not gonna lie. You know, it's deeply Nigerian, and it's about something we do not talk about a lot or enough. You know, spiritual arrogance inside the home. A lot of us can relate, okay? Now, let's do some spoilers, okay? I like to give a bit of spoilers. And you can skip this particular part. It's always gonna be the second segment on the show, right? Yeah, very, very light, you know, spoiler. Now, at the center of Oversabi Aunty is Stone Odogu, played by Toyin Abraham herself. And Toyin is convinced that she's the gold standard, you know, of Christian motherhood. She's Yoruba, she's married to an Igbo man, played by Mike Ezenwoye, and together they have 4 kids. Now, on the surface, this is the perfect family. Right, church going, well dressed, well behaved. You know, the kind of family the other parents are constantly compared to, at least according to Tom. And but Oversabi Aunty is not interested in surface appearances. You know, it is interested in the cracks that are beneath them. While Toyin loudly corrects other mothers, you know, judges how young women dress, you know, constantly reminds everyone that her kids can never go astray. Reality is quietly unfolding behind closed doors, and that's the film's central tension. So, enough of the spoilers. Let's go back to the critique. Now, let's talk about what the film is really about. Now, at its core, Oversabi Aunty is not a film about bad parenting. It's a film about misplaced parenting priorities. 2 different things. Now, Toyin is not the villain. She's not a bad person. She loves her kids, you know, but she confuses control with care and spirituality with superiority. So her kids want to talk to her. They try to talk to her. They want to have conversations with her. They try to express themselves, you know, but she's always too busy. She's always too right to be present. And the absence is emotional. It's not physical. It's where the real damage begins. And, you know, the film makes a quiet but very powerful argument. Now listen to this. Kids don't always rebel because they're wayward. Sometimes they rebel because nobody is listening. I'll take it again. Kids don't always rebel because they are wayward. Sometimes they rebel because nobody is listening, especially their parents. Especially those close to home. Now, let's go to the character dynamics and thematic depth. You know, one of the strongest aspects of this film is contrast. Now, Toyin represents performative righteousness. You know, she's doing the right thing loudly, publicly, and without empathy. Her husband, however, represents an emotional balance. You know, the guy, he listens more, he speaks softly sometimes, most times. He constantly advocates conversation over condemnation. Now, he understands something that Toyin doesn't. You know, he gets that morality without empathy often creates secrecy, not obedience, right? So you're wondering why the kids are not obedient. You know, they could front obedience. You know what I'm saying? Like, but you know, at the back they know what they're doing, right? Now, then there are the kids. The kids, each of them reflecting a different consequence of emotional neglect. It's not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's rebellion born from silence, fear, and suppression. Now, this thematic layering is where the film finds real ambition. Now, let's talk about culture as comedy in this film. A significant portion of the film's humor comes from the Yoruba Igbo marriage dynamic, right? From language barriers to how both parents call their kids different names. So imagine in the same house, you know, because of their different, you know, cultures. Of course, the kids are named, they have Yoruba names and they have Igbo names. But then the father would rather call the, you know, child by the Igbo name because it's Igbo, and the mother will call the child with the Yoruba name. You're giving the child stress. That's what's happening, or that's what happened in this film. You know, it's also the cultural confusion during the family's, during the first daughter's introduction. You know, when you're doing introduction and you invite the entire family, so the entire Igbo family, the entire Yoruba family, it can only be chaos. You can imagine. Now, these moments for me felt authentic and deeply familiar. You know, yes, some parts of it are exaggerated. I'm not gonna lie. You know, but the exaggeration works because it's rooted in lived experiences. There's stuff that when you're watching, you're like, nah, I've seen this before, right? It's a Nigerian comedy at its best. You're going to laugh here, and it's not forced jokes most times, but you know, cultural recognition. You know, you laugh because you've seen this before. You laugh because this is relatable. Maybe not to you directly, but to someone that you know, right? Yeah. So it's comedy that is necessary and that is a bit exaggerated, but it can work. Now let's go to the performance analysis. Performance-wise, Oversabi Aunty is uneven, and this, you know, it matters. Among the kids, Kid Baby stood out for me, right? She played, I think, the last daughter. I have 3 daughters and 1 boy. She played the last daughter, and her performance is grounded. It's natural and emotionally believable. And the second, another daughter, Ife Rele, who played the first daughter, she delivered strong moments, you know, particularly when restraint is required. The part where she had to talk back to her mom, you know, about her mom not listening, where mom hit her, you know, that kind of, I feel like that sort of was her best performance in the film. Not because of the moment, but how the moment was lived and how the performance came to be, right? And another person is Bianca. Now, Bianca also brings a quiet confidence to her role. The good thing about the kids, the ladies especially, is they are 3 different people. There's the first child in that family who is always the most decent, most times. The lady, you know, is almost the most decent. She's not hiding anything. You know, then the other kids were like the rebels. They're like, nah, bruh. You know, it's that balance. Now let's talk cinematography, sound, and technical elements. Visually, the film is solid. Visually, I thought it had one of the best camera works amongst Tony's, you know, raw style films. The cinematography is clean. You know, it had thoughtful, careful shot compositions and intentional camera movement. You know, we follow the characters and by extension, the camera movements. The setting felt lived in and appropriate. It wasn't out of place. You know, the house, you know, the church, the club scene, everything. It felt, you know, just fit for the scenes. right? And the sound, however, for me, I thought it was one of the film's weakest technical elements. You know, there are noticeable inconsistencies. There are parts where it felt as though, you know, Tony and Mike had the best lapel mics or, you know, microphones. And the other guys were struggling with the microphones, you know. Some beats at the part with Jemima's, you know, scenes. I didn't get Jemima and Dami, you know, when Jemima and Dami were having conversation, her sound was really bad. And some other parts in the film. I thought that, you know, that could have been better, you know, treated. You know, even the background score for me doesn't always support the emotional tone. There's certain moments of the films that needed some very good sound score to help elevate, you know, that particular scene, but then it just fell flat. The biggest part for me, one of the biggest parts for me would be where she took the fall for a kid. That for me is one of the most emotional scenes, you know, where she's saying she did something she did not do. So she's like, okay, I've not been this nice person to y'all, but this is how I could pay back. The score should have been it should have been deeper than what it was. Even the part where her first kid, you know, talked back at her, you know, that's also some redefining moments in the film. And I thought it needed some very heavy score. You know, I thought a stronger sound design could have elevated some key moments significantly. Now let's go to directing and editing. Now for a directorial debut, the direction is competent and occasionally inspiring. The film aimed to balance slapstick comedy with tragedy. You know, it's a very difficult tonal balance, to be honest. At times it succeeds, it does well. And sometimes it avoids sitting with discomfort long enough. For me, the editing follows a familiar rhythm. Humor, tension, release. For those who have seen the film, you will notice this move with the editing. Humor, tension, release. That is the flow of the editing. It helps to keep the pacing steady, you know, but it also makes some emotional beats feel, you know, feel rushed. Now, certain scenes like the August meeting sequence, you know, felt more decorative than functional. In my opinion, I'm not sure it did help, you know, the build up of the film. I probably get why it was there. Another convenient device, but it did not help the film move to the next level, in my opinion. You know, also the part where, you know, the brother and sister, the subplot of the brother and sister-in-law, you know, yeah, I wanted to see it finish, but, you know, it sort of just ended. And I was like, okay, what happened to it? You know, what happened to that particular, because it felt like some very good comic relief for the entire film, you know, especially with the sister-in-law, you know, but we sort of did not see how that conversation ended. Because when she was introduced, that's Auntie Rose. She was introduced as a figure that, you know, sort of can be troublesome, right? So I wanted to see it finish, mostly. And even the other guy said he was bringing his people and they were coming for the introduction and we did not see anything. So that for me also wasn't, yeah, the film could have done without it. You know, the film would not lose narrative strength without them. Like, it would go on, and it would go on well without them. If the focus was only on the family, you know, Tom, her husband, her kids, and the entire dynamics between, you know, being a child of God, or being prayerful, or being religious, you know, but not being religious, that could have been all the film was about. But I get the subplots to, you know, add to the film and to give it some lift, but if it doesn't directly help the build up of the story, I do not think it is necessary, in my opinion. Now let's talk about product integration. I see a lot of films these days trying to, you know, have that integration in their films. It's good for Nollywood. What it means is brands are now seeing that, okay, people are watching Nigerian films and they're, you know, weighty enough. They're dropping money for their products to be in the film. You know, I like it. But I don't think we still know how to organically integrate these products into our films. Right? I don't think we do. You know, for me, it's supposed to be subtle. You know, but when it's not subtle, it becomes a problem because subtlety matters in product integration. Right? I think the part that stood out for me here would be the city care part. We all know what city care is, right? And for me, I just felt it was off that they had to wait to the club to have that conversation. They drove all the way from their house to the club, right? And if you're going to have a conversation about the phone and how you got the phone, you don't have to say too much. Sometimes, see, less truly is more. It doesn't have to be too obvious. Now, we know that with CDK, you could pay, little by little and everything. So it could be as simple as, oh, where did you get your phone from? And the response is, oh, CDK. Because it felt like, Bianca knew about CDK. So it could be like, okay, how much did you pay? Monthly. So you don't have to go deep into, that app that allows you to pay monthly, the small. It's too stressful, okay? It's not, I get it, the brands, but then you have to let them understand that it's a level of creativity needed to suddenly, integrate products into films. Don't make it look like don't make it too obvious, if it's too obvious, it's robotic. It's not clean, it's not organic. However, Enioluwa's performance for me, I thought he struggled, I thought it was very flat. His character carried very significant emotional weight, but the emotional responses felt muted and underdeveloped. For the gravity of what Enioluwa's character is dealing with, the performance it wasn't convincing. And for me, it weakened, the film's most important moments. Toyin Abraham is a fantastic actor. I've said it before, and I'm going to keep saying it. She's one of the best actors we have in Nollywood at the moment. I like that she fully committed to Tone's exaggeration. Sometimes it works brilliantly, and sometimes it felt excessive. But that tension between effectiveness and excess is also the core conversation the film invites.